What is up, guys? Rick Smackus here. Thank you so much for stopping by, and today we have what I believe is a really interesting topic of discussion, especially during what is going on right now for Destiny 2, because let's be perfectly honest, Season of the Worthy has not gone well. The vast majority of the player base is very disappointed. Now, of course, if you are a relatively new Destiny 2 player, if you just started playing the game, you may not get what all the fuss is about because there is so much content within Destiny 2. It's a very content-rich game, and there's so many different activities and loot to chase and so on. But if you're a veteran player and you've done all of that already, and you are waiting for this new season to spice up your enjoyment and your interest within the game, Season of the Worthy has not delivered. Like, there just isn't enough content, especially when we look at PvE. The PvP side of things isn't going well with Trials of Osiris. Like, that's this whole can of worms. I'm not going to talk about that today. But PvE-wise, we have the bunkers, which have the clearing mechanic, which isn't a ton of content, isn't too hard to do. And then we have the legendary lost sectors. And that's about it. We have the Seraph Tower event, I suppose, also. That is something. But then we have just a bounty system to grind. We have a very limited amount of new PvE content, which, as a concept, isn't the worst thing in the world. There's often quite a bit of PvE content, and I, for one, am okay with suffering a bit as a PvE player if the PvP side of things is taken care of and it's a very PvP-oriented season. But of course, that's its own can of worms again with Trials. The thing is, however, people are very upset with this season. As I've explained, they are very upset at the lack of content. But Bungie has a ridiculous amount of content at its fingertips that it apparently just refuses to introduce. Like, I don't understand this. And that content is the old school raids. We have the original raid that came with the launch of Destiny 2 vanilla version, which of course is the big Leviathan Raid, but we also have Eater of Worlds and Spire of Stars as raid layers, which, to be honest, are basically raids. They have the same layout as, Scourge of the Past and Crown of Sorrow, where there's a beginning encounter, a travel encounter, and then 2 encounters within the same final room. The only difference is that Spire and Eater only have 2 available weapons in their loot pool, whereas the more recent raids have a whole section of raid loot, and I think that's what distinguishes them as full-fledged raids. But the point is, we have these old school raids. They're in the game. You can play them right now. You're seeing gameplay in the background of a prestige mode Leviathan run. It's not like Bungie has to do a lot of things to make this content viable. All they would need to do is up the power level and change the loot to random rolls. That is it. And it would matter quite a bit at times like this, when the community is begging for content, when the game is really suffering because this season didn't pan out. Wouldn't you guys like to have a remade raid to go and have a reason to grind? Now, it's not as exciting, of course, as a brand new raid, but I think most of you would agree that something is better than the nothing we currently have. And this is especially true if you are someone who plays a lot of raids, because currently there's only one that's viable, and that is Garden of Salvation. It's the only one giving out pinnacle sources, which in and of itself has caused problems. There's no heavy weapons available in the entire Garden of Salvation loot pool, which means it can be extremely difficult to advance your pinnacle levels because literally like 90% of the rewards in that raid are energy weapons. It causes huge problems when you're trying to level up. But considering so many people out there know how to do Leviathan, I think making all the Leviathan drops pinnacle may be the bad move. You could just have, like, upon completion, you get one random piece of Leviathan loot that's a pinnacle. even that would be a big deal. And if people already know how to do it, so what? That would actually make it a lot easier for many players within the community. A lot of people out there have never done a raid before. If you reintroduce the Leviathan Raid, and again, potentially the other 2 raid layers, you have a lot of people that are much more willing to Sherpa and much more capable of Sherpaing because they've done it in the past. But if you're someone who's sitting there saying, Rick, this is a dumb idea, the loot's already in the game, how much of a difference would this really make? Well, I'll tell you how much of a difference, a big, big difference, because when we actually take a look at the rewards within the Leviathan loot pool, these would be game-changing. These would be meta-shifting. These would be huge additions to the game if they were simply made to have random rolls. Seriously, let's take a look. First and foremost, we have a kinetic 600 rounds per minute auto rifle with the Ghost Primus. 600 RPMs are absolutely slaying right now, and having a kinetic version is extremely rare. This would open up a ton of different build possibilities. Let's move on to the Conspirator. It's a 200 RPM scout. That's probably the best archetype. That's the Mida archetype, so that could be a player as well. If we move on from there, the inaugural addressed pulse rifle, a 390 RPM pulse. That's the same as the Bygones, which is heavily used. In fact, this thing is so good, just with its static year 1 roll, you still see people rocking it sometimes today, and I would still see it being used quite a bit, even when random rolls were a thing. Moving on from there, of course, the Midnight Coup. Could you imagine a 150 kinetic, the Midnight Coup? If this was actually made to have random rolls, oh my goodness, what a game changer. Like, people would absolutely grind the crap out of these raids to get a randomly rolled Midnight Coup. We do have some stinkers. For example, the Mob Justice, your 1,900,000,000 RPM energy submachine gun, not a crazy piece of loot. But then you have stuff like the Last Legion. The Last Legion is the only adaptive frame, so 3-round burst sidearm in the game that is kinetic in the legendary slot. So could you imagine a legendary kinetic adaptive sidearm with random rolls? It would be our only one. Think of all the builds that would open up. I see people rocking adaptives in PvP all the time. And in PvE too. I mean, for goodness sakes, the Last Hope with Feeding Frenzy multi-kill clip or even Feeding Frenzy Rampage has become a mainstay in PvE loadouts. Imagine if you had access to that in the kinetic slot. Think of all the different things. Think of the different exotics that you could start to run alongside it in the energy slot. Heck, you could rock Divinity and have a kinetic adaptive frame. So like, this would be a huge meta-shifting, game-changing weapon if it was reintroduced. We have the Zenith of Your Kind shotgun, a rapid-fire shotgun. A lot of these are quite good. The Emperor's Envy, a precision frame fusion. These aren't doing too amazing. Moving on from there, the Alone as a God. This gun's so good, I still see it in PvP. It's a rapid-fire frame with insane base handling, and it has snapshot sights, and a low-power zoom. What more could you ask for? If you could get random rolls, this would be a huge mainstay in the PvP meta for sure. We have the It Stared Back sword. This thing is... Again, this loot matters so much, this is still relevant because this comes with Whirlwind Blade and Relentless Strikes, and having a sword with both of those perks is extremely in the meta right now. I've seen a lot of people rock this for PvE encounters. Guys, the I Am Alive grenade launcher, it's an adaptive, so it wasn't nerfed, and actually the Interference grenade launcher that was reintroduced this season and can get clown cartridge and full court, that's been a game changer. That is arguably the best PvE grenade launcher in the game right now. This is the same archetype, but it intrinsically has 7 rounds in a magazine. You need to put a backup mag on the Interference to get it to 7 rounds. This has no magazine extension perks. It just automatically comes with 7 rounds. If this was made into a random roll weapon, this would be so big. This would probably be the top slot. Everyone would be grinding for this for a PvE role. It would be absolutely insane. And of course, to end it all off, another heavy weapon. Notice we've got 2 heavy weapons that would solve the heavy weapon pinnacle problem I talked about earlier. And the second one is the Sinza of the past. Maxed out blast radius. This thing was absolutely meta for years. Like you still see people from time to time rocking this in PvP actually because of the absolutely maxed out blast radius. It's very easy to shoot behind a corner and still get your kill. So the loot table is excellent. Bungie knew what they were doing when they introduced these weapons. They're often extremely unique, being kinetic when that archetype is very rarely kinetic, having, good stats for the most part, and generally also pretty good perks, but they've just fallen behind because they're not random rolls. And I can't imagine it would be I'm not a developer, guys. I'm not. So I'm sure it's more work than I'm really kind of making it seem like. But to just reintroduce these weapons, they're already modeled in the game, so that I assume would be the vast amount of work. You would simply need to change these to drop with random rolls and then up the power level. That's it, and you have a wealth of content within the game. Not only would these be kind of like 3 new raids coming back, or even if they just did Leviathan, that would be frankly good enough, but these are potentially 3 new raids that are coming back. The vast majority of people started well after these raids were actually viable. The vast majority of people in the game have never done one of these raids because they have no reason to do it. So suddenly you give them a reason, you have these meta-shifting desirable weapons at a time like this, when we haven't had a new raid since Garden, and honestly it doesn't look like we're gonna have a new raid until the next fall expansion. Remaking these old raids with their extremely viable loot seems like a fantastic idea, but again, these are more than just potentially, new raids for a lot of people. All 3 of these raids have a built-in prestige raid system. The Leviathan has a prestige mode. The other 2 raids, or raid lairs, have prestige modes. They're a little bit different. That requires you to have certain loadouts. But I mean, the current raids don't even have that. The current raids don't even have a prestige mode. So you're almost adding more content than a normal raid if you were to reintroduce these. Not only that, it's more about just doing the raid. The Leviathan has that whole under the ship system where you're going through the belly of the Leviathan and you have the different watchers rooms. Guys, you have an extremely high chance to get exotics out of those underground or belly of the ship chests. What a great exotic farm. Like, oh my goodness, could you imagine? It's already actually a good exotic farm. If you want the Stompies, because those only drop year 1 exotics, farming Leviathan underbelly chests is like the best way to farm Stompies. Could you imagine if these were updated to drop, the proper loot pool of exotics? Could you imagine if they also more often dropped world drop legendaries? Like, this raid is on the cusp of being so relevant for fulfilling what the community is dying for basically saving the game. I don't know why Bungie isn't doing it. And please, Bungie, if you are listening, I feel like diverting a small amount of resources to remake these raids. You don't have to do anything special. I'm okay with not changing a single encounter and just upping the power level. This would give the community a ton of content it desperately needs. And guys, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed, found this informative, and if you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at @RickKackis. That's linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.